Hi, everyone. My name is Azim Khan, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 61 of hosting esteemed guests for this series, which will continue till August 17th. Today, we will be speaking to Mr. Prabal Banerjee. Hello, Prabal.
Hi.
Mr. Banerjee at present is working as an assistant professor of history at College, Malda, West Bengal, and also pursuing his PhD from the University of Hyderabad. He is a graduate student of Scottish Church College, Kolkata, and a postgraduate student of the University of New Delhi. He did his MPhil in history from Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. His areas of research include women's history, social history, and the history of medicine. Many of his research articles have been published in state and national level journals and book proceedings. He has also presented many research papers at state, national, and international conferences. Welcome again, Prabal.
Thank you. Thank you for
How are
the
you?
nice introduction.
So I'll get into the question straight away. So I'll start with a
Okay.
very broad question. Who are Bengali Muslims?
Actually, Bengali Muslims, it's a particular linguistic category, I must say, because whenever we will going through some Hindu nationalist discourse in Indian history, we will find that Hindus always condemned as Muslims. Bengali Hindus always condemned Bengali Muslims as only Muslims. They never categorized themselves as the Bengali Muslims, because Muslims and Bengali, as far as Hindu nationalist discourse are concerned, they are very much opposite to each other. But while I was going through my research, I found that these Bengali and Muslims are very much interconnected with each other. But it is true that in the very first half of the 19th century, if we see the discourses which happened during the first half of the 19th century, these Bengali Muslims remained far away from the Bengal Hindu Renaissance that has happened in Bengal. At that time, that was undivided Bengal, that has happened in Bengal during 19th century. And the main reason behind this was these Bengali Muslims was never what we may term as homogeneous category. They were never homogeneous category. This community was very heterogeneous one during this time in the first half of the 19th century. Okay, and there were two categories. If we go through the works of Rafiuddin Ahmed and Tajin M. Murshid, we will find there were two categories of Muslims. One was Ashraf and second was Atraf. Okay, and this Ashraf class was very urban educated Muslim gentry class who were very much averse to the Bengali language, and this was the main reason why they remained far off from this Bengali nationalism. Okay, and these Ashraf and Atraf class were rural agriculturalists, and they don't have any kind of think they will not study Bengali or something like that. But this Ashraf class was very much averse to the Bengali, and in the course of the 19th century and in the first half of the 20th century, we find that British administrators focused on this thing, and they started many kind of educational initiatives for these Bengali Muslims. And from this time onwards, we trace that this particular community called Bengali Muslims, who will refer as Bengali Muslims from the late 1930s, 1940s, this category coming to the fore, and some kind of middle class consciousness among the Bengali Muslims were coming to the fore, because from this time onwards, they got many kind of initiatives from the British government, like they were getting scholarships for higher education. They were getting scholarships in the maktabs, madrasas, which were the traditional centers of Islamic education. And from this time onwards, we trace that these Bengali Muslim middle class were coming to the fore, and we trace that there were many kind of Bengali Muslim journals like Bongio Musulman Sahitya Potrika, Nobanud, etc., etc., and these periodicals gave them a identity. Okay, and so this particular identity, when we are talking about this Bengali Muslim, we have to take into account all these historical narratives to describe this particular community.
And how did the Bengali Muslim respond to the Bengali Renaissance to reform the society during the late
after
19th
this
century?
Bengali middle class, after this Bengali middle class Muslims came to the fore, and these kind of periodicals, that the periodicals which I've already referred to in my previous talk, we find that now they, while they were some kind of identity consciousness were growing up among them, they also responded to this Hindu Bengali Renaissance, Bengali nationalism during this period, and they were also they were also started thinking to reform their own society, like the case was that with the Hindu Renaissance reformist movement, which that is another topic, actually altogether another topic. And just like their Hindu counterparts, these Muslim middle class also responded to the reform movements, and they were eager to reform their own society. They were eager to educate their women, and from this time onwards we trace some kind of particular category which Sonia Nishat Amin, a historian, a feminist historian, termed as Bengali Muslim Bhadra Mohila. And in these periodicals, after the Muslim women got the chance to receive education, and these then Muslim women also started criticizing their own society. They started talking about gender equality. They started talking about social reform. They started talking about various kind of womanly issues. Even many women were talking about women's health also. So particular categories were coming. A particular category was coming to the fore during this time. So these Bengali Muslim middle class responded to this Bengali nationalist movement through their reformation, through reforming their own society, as it was evident in the particular periodicals, Bengali Muslim periodicals, which were coming to the fore during this time.
And what was the relation to the British colonialists?
As far as British colonialism is concerned,
how did they react to colonialism?
Say these Bengali Muslims reacted to the colonialism in a various diverse ways. We don't have some kind. I don't have researched this area how they reacted to this British colonialism. But since they have imbibed, these Bengali Muslims imbibed the Western ideas of democracy, rationalism, nationalism, etc. So they might be reacted, and they also obviously, just like their Hindu counterparts, they started, while they were starting reforming their society, they must criticize. And in many writings also, which I have gone through in these Bengali Muslim periodicals, I found that many Bengali Muslim criticizing colonialism also, that colonialism they need to means they also started freedom movement among themselves, just like, and we found many kind of Muslim taking part in the freedom movement, because while Gandhi came, Gandhi marched Khilafat movement with the non-cooperation movement. We found the name of Shaukat Ali, Muhammad Ali, even B. Amman, mother of Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, who were addressing the nation, who were addressing the nation as her own son. So kind of regression was a kind of particular awareness was coming along in the Muslim society, I must say.
Okay, so the 20th century, the start of the 20th century was a very politically active time in India, with the rise of the Congress and then formation of the Muslim League. So you mentioned the did they interact with these political parties and
Sorry, but I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Hello, I can't hear you.
Hi,
actually.
Prabal.
Can you please repeat the question once? Yeah.
Yeah, so how did the Badra Mahilas interact with or respond to the rise of Congress and Muslim League and the independence movement in general?
Yeah, very good question. Many Bengali Bhadra Mahilas, whether Hindu or Muslims, responded to the Congress and all Muslim League, both in both way. So I have particular documents. I only want to mention here the name of Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, who was very active in the politics, nationalist politics during this period. Recently, Ramchandra Guha has published a book on Gandhi, and here he traced the relationship between Gandhi and Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, and the husband of Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, whose name was Rambhuj Datta Chaudhuri, was very active Congress worker. And after her marriage with Rambhuj Datta Chaudhuri, Sarala Devi Chaudhurani came into contact with Congress leaders. And before that, before her marriage also, she organized an organization named Bharat Sri Mohamondol, and he actively took part in the Congress politics during this time. She always through her writing, we will found her nationalist consciousness were growing up steadily. Another woman, Kadamburi Ganguly, who was a very successful doctor during this time, the period with which I am concerned with, she also took part in active nationalist politics during this time. And Begum Rokeya, if we see the writings of Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hossain, we will found that she was also aware of the nationalist politics during this time, which was going during this period. And this was the period of active nationalist politics, because when Gandhi emerged as a nationalist leader after 1915 in India, he introduced the mass politics, which the historians term that argued that the term is mass politics, because this is very much different from the elite politics during moderate period. Gandhi for the first time introduced the concept of mass politics during this time in India, and he for the first time gave a clarion call to the women to take part in the nationalist politics. And he was the first nationalist leaders who argued that women can take part also in nationalist politics from their own home. So many women during this time took part in active nationalist politics during this time.
So coming to partition, what were the experiences of Bengali women during partition?
Yeah, Bengali women, actually, if we go through various historical periodicals and texts, which I may argue, we will found that many women faced trauma during this time, because women was the only one. If we go with the argument of Urvashi Butalia, she argued that women was the only one who bear the brunt of the partition. And Urvashi Butalia gave us the estimate that around 75,000 of women 75,000 of women abducted during this partition, these riots, when the riots was going on. But Urvashi Butalia's account was focused only on the Punjab area of partition. And since I am concerned with the Bengal part, we have also very much rich literature which was available to me. And while I was doing my research on the Bengali women, particularly on Bengali Muslim women, I came through some book by Joshodhara Bagchi and by Gargi Chakravarti, who tells us about the trauma faced by the Hindu women. But here again in Bengal, the trauma or the violence which was faced by the women of Punjab is very different one from that of Bengal. Jayanti Basu, one psychology professor from the University of Calcutta, gave us a particular theory. She is arguing that Bengal faced a different kind of violence, and this violence was very different from the violence that was experienced in Punjab. In Punjab, if we go through the novels by Khushwant Singh, Train to Pakistan, or Azadi Ki Chhao Mein, if we go through these novels, we will find the description of gory violence, the history of bloodshed that was experienced in Punjab. But in that which Jayanti Basu argues that this was kind of hard violence. But in Bengal, actually the people in Bengal also people faced violence, but this was kind of soft violence, because there was nothing that kind of gory violence never took place in Bengal. People, and I interviewed, while I was interviewing many people, and I have interviewed people from both the communities, from both Hindus and Muslims, and many people confirmed me that it was the fear psychosis that forced the people to migrate. Nothing called that never Muslim forced Hindus to migrate from East Bengal, or from Hindus never forced Muslims to migrate from West Bengal. It was the kind of fear psychosis, which I may term as fear psychosis, that forced many people to migrate from this side of the border. And obviously, whenever this side migration from this side of the border was taking place, reverse migration was bound to happen. And this was the case with many Bengali Muslims, because and if we go through the partition literature by Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon, Kamla Bhasin, Gargi Chakravarti, and Jashodhara Bagchi, Shubharanjan Dasgupta, we will find these literatures only focused on the trauma faced by the Hindu women. One of the Hindu women whom I interviewed, I remember her name, Bashanti Rai Chaudhuri. Now she is 87 years old. She migrated from Dhaka, from present-day Bangladesh, to India in Kolkata during 1947. And she also confirmed me that nobody forced her family to migrate from Dhaka, and it was the fear psychosis. And she remembered that houses were burning during this time on the other side of the Buriganga. It's very important river in the city of Dhaka. And whenever when she left her home, she left because they were coming to Calcutta for her brother's treatment. He was suffering from typhoid during that time in August 1947. But she never knew that she would not go back to her ancestral home in Dhaka. Okay, but when she arrived in Calcutta, situation suddenly changed, and many people were coming, crossing the border to come to Calcutta. And we have several novels also during which depicted the partition, this kind of soft violence. We have Atin Bandyopadhyay's Nilkantha Pakhir Khoje. We have Agun Pakhi by Hassan Azizul Haq. We have Keapata Nauko by Profullo Roy. All these novels also focused on the particular aspect of partition, and they also tells us the particular human tragedy which the partition which caused by the partition, because many people were living their ancestral homeland, living their native place, living their own village. And many people also thought that during this time that this partition will be a very temporary one. We will return back to our ancestral home after this political tragedy when the government dismissed this political tragedy. But that never happened actually. Partition created this kind of human tragedy. So human dimension of partition is very important. It's very important to understand the human dimension of partition. Whenever a history textbook which we are going through, and while we are teaching in the colleges and universities and schools, only history textbook concerned with the political actors. But what about this human? What about these human experiences? What about this human dimension of partition? So it is very important to understand this human dimension of partition. Many children affected, many women affected, many men affected, and I got to know about this kind of exchange also took place, property exchange. From West Bengal, whoever left their home, the Hindus whoever left their home got from East Bengal, the Hindus left their home, and from West Bengal, many Muslims left their home, and they got exchanged their properties between themselves. The Hindus' home got took by the Muslims, and Muslims' home got took by Hindus. In Malda and Murshidabad district, which are very Muslim majority district, nowadays also many kind of property exchange took place during this partition time.
So could you please elaborate a little more on what exactly the soft violence was, and secondly, how did this soft violence lead to the fear that forced people to migrate?
Yeah. Actually, 1937 is very important. First Muslim ministry was formed in the year 1937, and it was a coalition ministry. Okay, because none of the political parties which was in the political forefront, Muslim League, Krishak Praja Party, and Congress. These three political parties were in the forefront during the year 1937, but none of these parties secured highest vote, and the ministry which was formed, it was a kind of coalition ministry. But however, from the October 1937, situation was changing. Muslim League was coming to the fore, and many peasant by rural agriculturalists, which I may term, these they got attracted to this Muslim League. So what happened, and in novel also, in many novels also, authors depicted this kind of situation, just like in Nilkantha Pakir Khoje, which I have already referred to. In Atin Bandyopadhyay talks about this kind of attraction of the towards the Muslim League by the common village folk. And Pirpur report, which was a report was focusing on this kind of Hindu hegemony, because now though in East Bengal rural area, what happened, if we see the economic structure of the East Bengal rural area, Hindu middle class was the main economic proprietor actually, and these rural Muslims were the poor tillers of the soil. So what exists there was the kind of Hindu hegemony. And from this time onwards, from 1930s 1940s decade, what we see that these Muslims became aware of their economic situation, and they view their land, they view the particular parts of East Bengal as their own. Okay, and even while I was taking interview of the migrants who came from that part, means from East Bengal to West Bengal, they also confirm me this thing, that Muslims were the poor tillers of the soil, and something called what we may argue the racial discrimination exists between Hindus and the Muslims. Whenever Muslims became invited to a Hindu household, they were forced to sit in a place designated for them only. Okay, so this kind of discrimination did exist in the East Bengal household and in West Bengal also. So what happened was, and when Muslim League called for direct action day, situation changed in West Bengal. Okay, and many murder took place, and here comes the importance of the experience of Bengali Muslim women, because I interviewed one Muslim woman who's staying in the Park Circus area now. Her name was Sultan Jahan Salik. She argued the tremendous atrocities to both the communities, which faced by the both communities. Many Hindus were killed, many Muslims were killed, and from this time, fear psychosis was coming to the fore, that we have to migrate to save our lives. Muslims in Kolkata thought that they have to flee from West Bengal to save their lives, and Hindus in East Bengal they thought that they have to flee from East Bengal to save their lives.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like we at the archive have many of these property exchange stories that you just mentioned, and I've personally have come across the stories that you've mentioned. For example, the money lenders, like in Punjab and Lahore especially. Money lending was a big issue. Like many of the people that I met said that Muslims used to owe Hindus a lot of money. So that was another reason why a lot of people wanted partition and wanted Hindus or Muslims to move areas. So that's very interesting. Exactly. And finally, that thing you said, my very first interview, I remember this lady from Kashmir, she mentioned how she used to sit on the roof of their house in Sialkot, and her taya, her uncle, and her uncle would point to the mountains and say, "Look, that's Kashmir. We're going to go back there soon enough." So that's another thing. Like in the Partition Archive as well, we have these stories where people
And
thought
another
that they
thing
would
was
just come
that
back.
Bengal, another thing was that if we see the picture of Bengal from 1870s or 1880s, W. Hunter, when he was giving us the first census of India, he was surprised by the fact that Bengal was a Muslim majority province during this time. In the later part of the 19th century, Bengal was a Muslim majority province. Okay, and many Muslims, their main area of staying was the now what is we termed as Bangladesh, in the Dhaka, in Borishal, in Faridpur, in Moymonsinh, in Sylhet, etc., etc. So W. Hunter was very surprised by this fact that Bengal was a Muslim majority province, and whenever this partition happened, this Muslim majority Bengal became a Muslim minority province actually. And we have a very important book by Joya Chatterjee, who argued that about 1.5 million Muslims migrated from West Bengal to East Pakistan, and they never returned back actually. And I took interviews of several women, Bengali Muslim women like Shormili Ahmed, Miratun Nahar, Sultan Jahan Salik. They also argued that, and I interviewed many Bengali Muslim male also, like Kabul Chaudhary from Murshidabad district. He argued that within one night, their whole family dispersed from this side of the border. They all migrated from West Bengal to East Bengal. Another thing, they were given option also, whether whoever they were in government service, they were given the option that to choose which province they want to stay in. So many Muslims actually choose East Pakistan during this time, and they migrated from this side of the border. Shormili Ahmed told us that she born in West Bengal, but she was forced to migrate from West Bengal to East Bengal for her father's job, because her father opted for East Pakistan government job actually. And Sultan Jahan Saleh trauma is very much important. This soft violence I'm talking about, if we want to explain this kind of soft violence, so this was the trauma faced by these Muslim ladies, actually Muslim Bengali Muslim women. Miratun Nahar also confirmed me that her mother Nurun Nahar and her grandmother Nur Jahan, actually they never wanted to migrate from West Bengal to East Bengal, and they ultimately they stayed behind, but their husband left for their job in East Pakistan. So her family also got dispersed due to this partition tragedy actually. Even Sultan Jahan Salik mentioned me that I am the only one debris living in this part of the border. Whole of my family migrated to East Bengal actually. So this kind of trauma faced by the Bengali Muslim women. So I think that this is the soft violence, because nobody forced them to migrate, but this partition created a social situation that people actually think that they should migrate from this side of the border.
So ultimately, one last question, Prabal. So considering Bengal had such a rich social, cultural, economic history, how did the splitting of Bengal after partition ultimately affect it, like in a very broad
Yeah,
way?
obviously, partition created a social vacuum, no doubt, actually, because when Hindus and Muslims stayed together in this part of and in undivided Bengal, if we go through the historical evidences, if we go through the historical sources of the 19th century, we found that in the periodicals, in the journals, in the newspapers, and in the books which was published from Bengal before partition, we saw that both Bengal and Muslims, Bengali Hindus and Muslims contributed to those volumes. But ultimately, whenever this partition happened, partition created a vacuum, particularly for the Bengali Muslim women, because many Muslim women like Sophia Kamal, Begum Rokeya Sakhwat Hossain, Samsun Nahar Mahmud, they have created something intellectual horizon over throughout the Bengal. But whenever this partition happened, partition created a vacuum. Many educated Muslims migrated from West Bengal for that to that side of the border. So ultimately, partition created a social and political vacuum for all of us, I must say. And partition is a continuous process, because we who are from the migrant family, not at all migrant family. Actually, my grandfather and grandmother never stayed there for always they stayed in West Bengal for their job. But we lost some kind of desh, because in Bengali we termed our native place as our desh. We lost our desh actually, and for the generation after generation, partition stayed in our minds. Partition is a continuous process. Urvashi Butalia, noted historian of partition, always argues that partition is a continuous process actually.
Thank you so much, Prabal. That was a very fascinating insight
Thank
into
you.
Bengal and partition. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. Please join us tomorrow for another interesting conversation. The 1947 Partition Archive is hosting this series to commemorate 75 years of partition. It started on June 3rd, and the series will conclude on August 17th.